Hello there, it's Dr. Driver attempting to show this to you. Yes, these are my notes drawn from Richard Kieckhefer on Chapter 6, Arabic Learning and the Occult Sciences. The people who studied astrology and alchemy in the 12th and following centuries would not have thought of themselves necessarily as magicians. Their enemies might call them that. Conservatives going back to Isidore of Seville classified astrology and alchemy as magic. It was only in later centuries, especially at the end of the Middle Ages, that practitioners began to see themselves as engaged in natural magic. In the meantime, new learning and common folk tradition were linked, making it impossible to study one in isolation from the other. Now, if you've been reading your Chaucer, you'll notice that in the Franklin's Tale, Aurelius's brother takes him to the University of Paris, I think. Takes him to a French university where he has studied to become a priest because he knew another guy studying to become a priest. A clerk is a student in medieval speak. And he also was versed in the dark arts. So universities were sort of hotbeds of magic. Brief history of universities. Universities were developed out of the cathedral schools in the 12th century. Oxford, Cambridge, the University of Paris, the Italian universities of Salerno and Bologna, with their great reputations as medical universities, and others, came out of what were originally schools housed in churches and then become these great universities. This is a picture of the University of Paris from the Middle Ages. You may remember Trotula of Salerno. She was the woman healer who studied medicine, it's thought, at Salerno, though women generally were not allowed to attend universities until well into the mid-19th century. The main subjects for university study were for the priesthood, theology, and medicine and law. Universities produced educated individuals who might go on to study learned forms of magic or occult sciences, even if these were not subjects for formal study. The boundaries between astronomy and astrology, as we have said, were very porous and malleable in the Middle Ages. One was seen as related to the other, as were health issues. Those were connected somehow to the stars and also to astrological charts. The Arabic influence is felt mainly in medical practice, particularly in surgery. And this is me, really, not Kieckhefer. Al-Qasis, who was the great Arabic surgeon of Cordoba in Spain, wrote a surgical manual that circulated from the 10th through the 15th centuries in manuscript and many translations, including Middle English, which was often illustrated with images of the medical tools one would need as a surgeon. Abulcasis also makes it into print, so he's continuing to be published from the 10th century through the 17th century. Abulcasis was the first to identify the hereditary nature of hemophilia and describe ectopic pregnancy, which would have been lethal back in the day. He was also the first to understand the nervous system and the root cause of paralysis. He developed early tools for cesarean section, which is when you have to cut the baby out of the mother rather than giving a natural birth, and also for cataract surgery. So he was very well versed in all this. Here are some more of his tools. The Islamic world inherited Greek astrology, and alchemy was also developed among the Muslims and then became influential in the West. So not only do we get numerals from Arab culture, but we also get medicine and also astronomy and what will become chemistry. In the 12th century, well over 100 works were translated from Arabic into Latin, or else written in Latin specifically as paraphrases of Arabic learning. The most prolific writer of these was Gerard of Cremona, with 68 known titles to his credit, including a handful of astrological writings. He was mainly known, though, as a healer. He was interested in healing. Jewish scholarship long flourished within the Muslim world. As we have seen, Jews seem to have helped in the transmission of Arabic texts into the West. So through Jewish culture, Arabic texts are transmitted to the West. In addition, some Western scholars working in the occult sciences obtained access to Jewish texts, like the Kabbalah. Kieckhefer mentions that one astrological work gives Hebrew names for the planets and for the signs of the zodiac, and its prescriptions for divination require transliterating the letters of a person's name into the Hebrew alphabet for their numerical values. This is numerology, essentially. Nor did Western scholars preoccupied with these new discoveries neglect earlier Latin materials. Works such as Julius Firmicus Maternus writing on astrology were now rediscovered. And here's a printed edition. So Julius Firmicus Maternus is an early 4th century writer, as you see from his dates. And his work also goes right from that period into print later. And here we've got the figure for Sagittarius from a printed edition of Maternus in the 16th century. So the main practice of astrology is, of course, making horoscopes and indicating the influence of stars and planets at the time of one's birth. This could be read against a chart written for a specific event, like a marriage or a political treaty. Kieckhefer suggests, he cites several examples of this, including a manuscript that includes 4 horoscopes. One of them is labeled a figure for the arrival of a certain person in England. The second has the caption inside a central square, quote, "The question concerning the army of Normandy," and the conclusion is that it will not come, unquote. The third pertains to a deceased Count of Anjou, and the fourth is a figure for commerce between 2 persons. The astrological information given for these horoscopes points to 1151 as the year to which they refer. They all have political significance. Knowing where the stars and planets were located at a person's birth or on the anniversary of a birth could show how heavenly bodies affected a person's character and general destiny. And you can see here the Gemini, sort of these little babies on the zodiac man's arms, and the other astrological signs kind of over his body. Capricorn actually governs the knees here. Interesting. Seems to be Gemini at the bottom, too. Okay. So if you knew your chart and then you cast a chart for a specific event, you could tell outcomes, apparently. Marriages, career decisions, and other plans might be made accordingly. Secondly, astrology might be used for interrogations. Given a particular time for a trip, a marriage, a battle, or some other vital action, what outcome might this undertaking have? Thirdly, charts could be used for inceptions. What is the best time to get married? What is the best time to go to battle? What is the best time to negotiate peace? Astrology also had implications for medicine, as we know. The surgeon or the barber surgeon was supposed to know what signs of the zodiac governed which parts of the body, because it was dangerous to operate on or bleed a patient when the wrong constellation was dominant. Physicians need to know this, and this is why astrology was studied in medical schools. The University of Bologna had a professor to teach beginning physicians how to gauge the influence of the stars on human bodies. Astrological science was also deemed useful for rulers, and various forms of fortune-telling seem to have been popular at court, as we've read before. But astrology was probably the most popular. Kieckhefer provides numerous examples of this. There was a chaplain to William the Conqueror who was so busy studying the stars he forgot to sleep. There were astrologers to Emperor Frederick II, who cast horoscopes for all of his children, and Frederick did not even consummate his marriage to the Empress Isabella until the astrologers had announced the most propitious time for doing so. Emperor Rudolph I, born on May 1st, 1218, with Mars and the Sun in powerful conjunction, was crowned on October 14th, 1273, when the same planet and star were conjunct. So it's all done by astrological chart. And if you look at the section on classes, you'll see that Nancy Reagan, Ronald Reagan's wife, former President Ronald Reagan's wife, consulted an astrologer when Ronald Reagan was unwell. Interesting. However, one no-no for royal astrologers was predicting a ruler's death, because this could border on treason. As in astrology today, in medieval astrology, it was important to gauge the position of stars and planets to sort out the degree of their impact. Each planet had its own nature and effects and areas of influence. The moon was feminine, watery, cold, and moist, powerful during a person's infancy, and sometimes associated with madness. Luna, of course, is the Latin for moon. Lunacy is madness. And chastity. Venus was feminine, airy. Oh, here's another moon chart, actually. It's a moon and sun chart that gives you a way to reckon where you are astrologically according to your sun and moon. You can see that a little bit. You can see some of the signs there, like Leo under the sun sign. Here we are on Venus. Venus was feminine, airy, hot, moist, powerful in adolescence, and linked with sensuality. And one of the signs she governs Taurus. And you see the bull on the right-hand side there, and also Libra, the scales. Each of the other planets had its own characteristics. The path along which these heavenly bodies traveled was divided into 12 houses of unequal size. So when you get that song, when the moon is in the 7th house, it's the dawning of Aquarius. The house refers to a place where a planet is in the sky. So 6 of these were in the visible sky, and the other 6 were below the horizon. The area of life that the planets influence depends on which house they're in at a specific time. And there's more on this in Kieckhefer if you're interested in casting your astrological charts. In City of God, St. Augustine said that stars could predict the future, but they could not produce events. So they could predict the future, but they could not produce events. St. Augustine's not letting go of the idea that people have free will, that they are not completely governed by the planets and stars. Astrology was generally accepted, especially its influence on the human body in medieval Europe. Its use in medicine and in predicting weather was widespread, but astrology could not predict human behavior, so you had to draw a line there. There were lots of arguments in the Middle Ages about predestination and free will, with astrology added to the mix, so that the idea was that astrology could predict general trends, but not particular chance events. So it can't predict with certainty, and human will could override the influence of the stars. So no matter how bad your horoscope, you could still overcome it. So free will was very emphasized. And there were lots and lots of debates about predestination and free will, even in Chaucer, even in literary texts in the Middle Ages. Kieckhefer then goes on to describe astral magic and the drawing of astrological signs on magic images to draw the power of the heavenly bodies. While Thomas Aquinas viewed magnets and other phenomena we regard today as simply natural, that's the way they work, he saw them as influenced in their actions by stars and planetary influences, but he also thought that drawing astrological signs on objects could invoke demons, so he warns against it. Others disagreed, thinking that magical images could be used to alter events without direct use of magic. So you're just having a wish and having your talisman, but it's not like you're actually trying to enforce something or make something happen. The best known work in the West on the subject of astral magic was originally an Arabic text called the Picatrix. And this includes various magical and astrological formulas. Kieckhefer gives some of those to us here in his text. He says to inscribe a set of markings or talismanic signs on a piece of linen under the proper astrological conditions Add the name of a person, set fire to the cloth, and the person named will be compelled to go wherever you want. Okay. Write other signs on a lead tablet and hide it in any habitation, and you will draw down the power of Saturn in such a way that the place will become depopulated. That's interesting. One chapter in the Picatrix talks about how to pray to the planets, and this may have been one model for the astral prayer that is made in Chaucer's Franklin's Tale, the prayer to the planets. You also get Troilus in the Troilus and Crusade poem written by Chaucer. Troilus prays to the planets, but of course it's set in pagan antiquity. Now, alchemy. Oh, here's the Franklin. Here's a picture of the Franklin from the Ellesmere manuscript, which is in the Huntington Library in California. And his tale deals with magic, as does the Squire's Tale, and also the Canon Yeoman's Tale, which deals mainly with alchemy. Okay, alchemical tools. Well, alchemy arose in antiquity and was continuing to be known in the Byzantine and Arabic worlds. It moves to the West, like so many other subjects, with the translation of Arabic texts in the 12th century. The essential point of alchemy is to discover the elixir or philosopher's stone, which can transmute lead or other base metals into gold and silver. In their search for this elixir, alchemists would spend years working over increasingly complex furnaces and laboratories, attempting to refine, sublimate, fuse, and otherwise transform their various chemicals. Alchemy was, in fact, the forerunner of modern chemistry. And as in medieval medicine, medieval alchemy was practiced according to the stars and planets. When alchemists worked under a waxing moon, Kieckhefer says, they obtained purer metals. Astrology was linked to alchemy. And here's an alchemical chart, which doesn't look exactly like a chemistry chart, but this is a modern one, actually. So there's obviously practitioners still. Anyway, there are a lot of stories, Kieckhefer tells us some, about various alchemists who claimed that they had been able to transmute base metal into gold or silver, and it was stolen or lost or something else happened to it. Alchemy was also linked to health. Alchemists were credited with making healing elixirs, but alchemists were also seen as charlatans. In the 14th century, Chaucer conveys the widespread view of alchemists in his Canon's Yeoman's Tale, which presents the alchemist as a rogue who spends so much time around noxious chemicals that he smells like a goat and robs people, in this case a kind of believing, a naive cleric, of his money by persuading him that he can produce gold or silver. They have all these little tricks. They can take silver pieces and insert them into a piece of charcoal, from which, not surprisingly, they then produce silver. Or they pretend to obtain it by stirring a crucible or pot, but the stick they use is hollow and has silver filling inside it. They feign conversion of copper into silver, but they accomplish this feat by having the silver up their sleeves. Evidently, there were, in fact, alchemists who tried to pass off fake gold or false gold or silver as the real item. So there is already fakery, replicating, an attempt to replicate gold. So to curb this practice, Pope John the 22nd, you see his date 1316 up here, Pope John stipulated that anyone who made or circulated counterfeit gold or silver, which would have been coin for people mostly, would have to pay a fine in real gold or silver equal in weight to the false metal. Let me get on to the cult of secrecy and the Book of Secrets. Subjects like astrology and alchemy were supposed to be restricted to the few. Kieckhefer notes that Kieckhefer notes that Albert the Great's astrological work, The Mirror of Astronomy, contains a solemn warning that its teaching should be kept secret. And for obvious reasons, the Picatrix is obsessed also with this concern. This is a common theme in all magic books. Books about magic were often written in ciphers, and one of the most famous ones is this one. This is the bizarre Voynich manuscript, which is now owned by Yale University Library. It has been written in code that has never been broken. There are all kinds of theories about it. There's lots of pictures of these little naked ladies bathing in green waters with strange connections between them. I've heard lectures on by people who talked about being able to break the code, but no one has been able to break the code. So far as I know. Here's another page from the Voynich manuscript. This looks like a mandrake root, doesn't it? But the language the text is written in is not a recognizable language. So it still remains a mystery. It's quite fun. There are other books circulating in Middle English, like The Secret of the Secrets, which I also have another picture of on your class's site. This discusses natural magic, medicine, the powers of gems, and astrology. And this was one of the most popular books in Europe. Like Nostradamus, the predictions of Nostradamus today, which is the most stolen book from libraries in America, which is interesting. Nostradamus is like I said, mystical writer of, I think, the 17th century. And after 9/11, people said, oh, he predicted this, it's all in here. But, I mean, it's also obscure. It's very hard to follow what's going on. But Nostradamus is the most ripped off book in America. Secret of the Secrets was probably also stolen from time to time. We have a fair number of copies floating around still. And it purports to be the teachings of Aristotle, but it really isn't. So this insistence on secrecy, says Kieckhefer, highlights a dimension of the occult arts that might otherwise be less clear. Their value simply as a form of knowledge. And this is what Dr. Faustus says he wants to gain at the beginning of Christopher Marlowe's play. Oh, here's the Secret of the Secrets. Sorry, backing up. Secret of the Secrets in Arabic. Here's an Arabic copy of it. So this is an Arabic source copy for the later Western copies. Okay, here we are, Dr. Faustus. Richard Burton is Dr. Faustus. Love those 16th century glasses. Yes, this is what Faustus wants. He's mastered all fields of learning, he says at the beginning of the play, and so he needs to learn about magic. We also have legends growing up around those practicing magic, like Faustus. Kieckhefer mentions the bronze or brazen head that purportedly spoke and predicted the future that was kept by Albert the Great in a box. Here's the box. Okay, time is, time was, time is past. Okay, so here's the bronze head. Here's its case. It's in a book. You open the book and the head is in there, and it comes out and predicts the future, predicts the past, and predicts what's going to happen now. So this bronze head, this actually is from a play, Friar Bacon and Bungay, which is a play, I think it's a 16th century play. I read it in college, which has a brazen or bronze head that speaks in it. I also saw one of these recently. I'm trying to remember what the name of that TV series is. There was also a head in a box that was the head of a witch. It was fairly grotesque. Anyway, that also looked like it was made partly of metal. Anyway, this head of Albert the Great was purportedly destroyed by Thomas Aquinas, who was so annoyed by its talking all the time, almost literally a chatterbox, that he smashed it with a hammer to quiet it. This same head is also associated with Roger Bacon, who is also known as Dr. Mirabilis, Dr. Miracle, who was a medieval English philosopher and Franciscan friar. And here you see a volume printed in the 17th century. Look at that date, 1683, on the title page. Bacon himself lived in the 13th century, so he's got books that are still being read and circulated into the 17th century. And look at the subject of this. The Cure of Old Age and Preservation of Youth by Roger Bacon, a Franciscan friar. Okay, and then there's also an account of the Tree of Life, which is another kind of magical element, but I think Roger Bacon would do very well in sales today, actually. Finally, Kieckhefer's chapter finishes with a discussion of the Renaissance magus, or magician, of whom there were plenty, including the rather spectacular John Dee, who was mainly a mathematician at the court of Elizabeth I. He really was a groundbreaking magician. Mathematician, but he was known as a magician. Dee's an interesting guy. I'll get back to him in a second. All right. Humanism, as you may know, was one marker of the Renaissance, of the movement away from the medieval focus on the divine hierarchy of God, man, animals, to a renewed focus on the virtues and powers of men and women themselves. As Hamlet says, what a piece of work is a man, how infinite in faculties. So the focus in the Renaissance moves from this very religiously rigid hierarchy, medieval hierarchy, to um, focus on people and their agency in the world. Humanists also recovered classical texts like the Golden Ass and began to develop a sense of history as well as reverence for the classical era. The mythic figure taken as a saint for this movement was Hermes Trismegistus, whose image appears on a mosaic pavement laid at the Cathedral of Siena in 1480s. Now, Hermes Trismegistus, say that 10 times twice. No, fast. Anyway, Hermes Trismegistus was cited a lot. Whether he was real or not is up for debate. Anyway, in this pavement at the Cathedral of Siena, he stands beside Sibyls. Now, here's a Sibyl. This is not in Siena. This is in the Sistine Chapel, which is in Rome, as you know, painted by Michelangelo. But the Delphic Sibyl is one of the prophetic pre-Christian figures that, according to later lore, predicts the coming of Christ, which is why the Sibyls become important. And the Sibylline Oracle predicts all kinds of stuff. That's another kind of text that also is used for magical purposes. So Hermes, in the pavement at Siena, getting back to Hermes, stands beside Sibyls, and he is here shown in the pavement anyway as a prophet of Christianity, though he has very strong ties with magic, astrology, and alchemy. So interesting kind of double-edged image there in the pavement at the Cathedral Church of Siena. The humanists of the 14th through 16th centuries were heirs to earlier students of antiquity. And while they conceived of themselves as witnessing a renaissance or rebirth of classical knowledge, they were, in fact, continuing a much earlier fascination with ancient Greece and Rome. You also get this period when Roman writing comes into fashion. And Roman writing originally comes from Roman inscriptions, but we use Roman type today. The New York Times is set in Roman type, but don't get me off on that. That's not even in my notes. All right, so humanists really spend a lot of time recovering Greek and Roman texts. And there are many people interested in magic. Here's Hermes again. Marsilio Ficino is a very famous one. Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, Johannes Trithemius. These people are mathematicians. They're philosophers. They read classical languages. They're very interested in Plato. Ficino practices astral magic and writes about how to pursue it. Trithemius was a German Benedictine abbot and polymath who was a lexicographer. He put together dictionaries, early forms of dictionaries. Chronicler, he was a cryptographer. He knew how to write in code, and he was an occultist. Pico della Mirandola read and studied the Kabbalah and upheld the value of natural magic. And Johannes Reuchlin, who we mentioned in earlier lectures, also mentioned in Kieckhefer, was a noted Hebrew scholar who believed in the use of occult names and words. Okay, finally, something about John Dee. Here's an engraving of him. And here you have his dates again. See, he's called an English mathematician there, Mathematicus Angelorum. He was an astrologer. He was an antiquary. He was mostly remembered for his mathematical publications. Here's his Euclid. This was groundbreaking. So this is the rediscovery of Euclid's geometry, which Dee wrote about at length. And here's another book that you see here. This is a figure. This is called a volvel. This is a chart where you've got a little moving part, and you can move the part around to see how the astrological signs line up. I'll let you look at that for a moment while I talk about Dee. Dee is very learned, and he's so learned that he manages to enter royal circles. He was commended to Edward VI by Sir William Cecil and Sir John Check. Now, Edward VI was the son of Henry VIII and Jane Seymour, as you may remember. He was awarded a pension of 100 crowns a year, which is pretty nice. He was given lands. He was given more lands, and he enters into the service of the Earl of Pembroke, and then he works for the Duke of Northumberland, and he becomes a tutor to all these noble children. So in Protestant England, Dee is doing just fine. When Queen Mary, who is the first child of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, ascends the throne in 1553, she cracks down on the Protestants and also martyrs a number of them, hence her nickname Bloody Mary. Dee was arrested in 1555 on the order of the Privy Council on the charge of calculating the nativities of the king, the queen, and Princess Elizabeth, and also of conjuring and of witchcraft. He was also charged with conspiring by enchantments to destroy Queen Mary. Well, fortunately, Queen Mary dies before Dee does, and on the accession of Elizabeth, we see Dee back at work, this time for Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester, who's been romantically linked sometimes with Elizabeth I. Dudley sought Dee's astrological advice upon a propitious day for her coronation. Dee was introduced into the royal presence, was introduced to Elizabeth by Dudley and also by William Herbert. And the Queen then became Dee's patron. Dee traveled widely, and for a time he worked at Chetham's Library in Manchester, which is still a working library. I have done some research there. It's in Manchester in the north of England. It's a chained library. Some of the books are chained to the shelves so that people didn't steal them. But it is a medieval library attached to a choir school, which is now a music school, which is still functioning. And Dee has a workroom in Chetham's Library. And on Dee's desk or table, there is this hoof print. So it's very bizarre. Of course, the story goes that Satan visited Dee. Dee was conjuring the devil, and he left his hoof print on the table. So with that thought, I think we finish.